March the 17th, 1945. Remagen Bridge, Rhine River, Germany. 0847 hours. The morning mist clung to the dark waters of the Rhine as German artillery crews frantically adjusted their 80mm guns along the eastern bank. For 3 days, they had watched American forces pour across the damaged but still standing Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, the last intact crossing over Germany's greatest natural barrier. Colonel Hans Scheller crouched in his concrete bunker, field glasses pressed against tired eyes, scanning the gray sky for signs of the Luftwaffe reinforcements that would never come. The thunder began as a distant rumble, not the familiar drone of Allied bomber formations that had terrorized German cities for months, but something different, something that made veteran soldiers pause and cock their heads toward the western horizon. 3 dark shapes emerged from the low clouds, flying lower than any sensible pilot would dare. Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, massive single-engine fighters that the Americans had transformed into something far more devastating than their designers ever intended. What happened in the next 7 minutes would shatter the Wehrmacht's final defensive line on the Rhine and demonstrate how 3 aircraft could accomplish what entire bombing wings had failed to achieve. The sound that followed would haunt German survivors for decades, not just the roar of engines, but the thunder of a new kind of warfare that made traditional defenses obsolete overnight. This convergence of American innovation, desperate German resistance, and revolutionary tactics would reshape how wars were fought, proving that in the hands of skilled pilots, even a handful of aircraft could collapse defenses that had taken months to construct. By March 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing under the weight of a 2-front war that had stretched German resources beyond breaking point. The Red Army was advancing through Poland toward Berlin, while Anglo-American forces had crossed the Rhine at multiple points, shattering Hitler's last hope of holding the Western Allies at Germany's traditional barrier. The capture of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen on March 7th had stunned German high command. For the first time since Napoleon, foreign armies held a bridgehead across the Rhine in the German heartland. The Wehrmacht's response was desperate and immediate. Field Marshal Walter Model, commanding Army Group B, received direct orders from Hitler to destroy the Remagen crossing at any cost. German engineers attempted repeated demolitions, but American forces had secured the bridge too quickly. Luftwaffe dive bombers launched suicidal attacks against the span, losing dozens of aircraft to concentrated Allied anti-aircraft fire. Artillery barrages from carefully positioned 80mm guns created a steel curtain over the river, but American engineers continued strengthening the bridgehead. General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group had poured 3 full divisions across the narrow bridge in 72 hours, establishing a foothold that threatened to unlock the entire German defensive system along the Rhine. Every hour the bridge remained intact allowed more American armor, artillery, and supplies to accumulate on the eastern bank. German intelligence estimated that within a week, Bradley would have sufficient forces to launch a breakout that could reach the heart of Germany in days rather than months. The German defensive position along the Rhine represented months of careful preparation. Concrete bunkers housing anti-aircraft guns commanded every approach to the bridge. Artillery positions had been surveyed and registered to deliver precise fire on any target within range. Machine gun nests covered the roadways and rail lines leading to the crossing. Panzer reserves waited in concealed positions, ready to counterattack any American breakthrough attempt. Yet traditional defensive tactics were proving inadequate against American air power that had evolved far beyond its original conception. The P-47 Thunderbolt, originally designed as a high-altitude interceptor, had been transformed by American ingenuity into a ground attack weapon of devastating effectiveness. Pilots had learned to use the aircraft's massive radial engine and rugged construction to deliver precision strikes against targets that bombers could never hit accurately. The tactical problem facing American commanders was clear, but seemingly impossible to solve with conventional methods. The American 9th Air Force had been conducting close air support missions over the Remagen bridgehead since March 8th, but traditional bombing methods had proven frustratingly ineffective against the German defensive positions. High-altitude bombing missions scattered ordnance across wide areas, often missing the precisely located bunkers and gun emplacements that threatened the bridge. Medium bombers flying at lower altitudes faced murderous anti-aircraft fire from German 80mm guns that had been specifically positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. Colonel Francis Gabreski, commanding the 56th Fighter Group, faced a tactical challenge that would have seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. His P-47 Thunderbolts were being tasked not just with air superiority missions, but with surgical strikes against hardened defensive positions that required the precision of artillery with the mobility of aircraft. The Republic P-47D, weighing over 7 tons when fully loaded, had evolved from a pure fighter into America's most effective close air support weapon through a combination of engineering innovation and pilot ingenuity. The transformation of the Thunderbolt into a ground attack aircraft represented one of the war's most successful adaptations of existing technology to meet new tactical requirements. Engineers had developed techniques for mounting external ordnance that turned the fighter into a precision bomber capable of carrying up to 2,500 pounds of bombs, rockets, or specialized munitions. More importantly, pilots had learned to use the aircraft's exceptional diving characteristics and stable gun platform to deliver attacks with accuracy that exceeded anything achievable by traditional bombers. Captain Robert Johnson, leading the 3-aircraft strike mission on March 17th, exemplified the new breed of American fighter pilot who had mastered both air-to-air combat and ground attack techniques. With 27 confirmed aerial victories and over 100 combat missions, Johnson understood that the war's outcome now depended less on dogfights between fighters than on the ability to destroy enemy ground forces with surgical precision. His squadron had been experimenting with new tactics that combined the Thunderbolt's devastating firepower with innovative approaches that could penetrate heavily defended targets. The specific munitions loaded onto the 3 P-47s represented cutting-edge American ordnance technology adapted for close air support missions. Each aircraft carried a combination of 500-pound general-purpose bombs, 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVAR, and full ammunition loads for their 8.50 caliber machine guns. The rockets, in particular, had proven devastatingly effective against concrete fortifications when delivered with precision that only single-engine fighters could achieve. German defensive doctrine had not adequately adapted to counter this new form of air attack that combined the precision of artillery with the speed and maneuverability of fighter aircraft, creating vulnerabilities that 3 determined American pilots were about to exploit with catastrophic effectiveness. Captain Robert Johnson pressed his back against the leather seat of his P-47D as the aircraft climbed through 8,000 feet. The massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine pulling them toward their target with mechanical determination. At 24, Johnson had already survived more combat than most men would see in a lifetime. His hands moved with unconscious precision across the controls. Mixture rich, propeller pitch adjusted, gun switches armed. Behind him, Second Lieutenant James McCarthy and Flight Officer Thomas Walsh maintained perfect formation, their aircraft loaded with enough ordnance to level a city block. These weren't the fresh-faced recruits who had arrived in England 2 years earlier. They were veterans who had learned to read the battlefield from 15,000 feet, who could identify German positions by the angle of shadows cast by camouflage netting. Johnson's logbook recorded 312 combat hours over occupied Europe, each mission teaching lessons that no training manual could provide. He had seen too many friends disappear into German flak clouds, too many good pilots reduced to smoking craters in French farmland. Today's mission carried the weight of all those losses. 3 men with a chance to accomplish what entire bomber formations had failed to achieve. The mission profile represented a complete departure from established American air doctrine. Instead of high-altitude bombing runs that scattered ordnance across wide areas, Johnson's flight would attack from treetop level, using terrain features to mask their approach until the final seconds. Intelligence reports had identified 3 critical German positions: an 80mm gun emplacement commanding the bridge approach, a concrete bunker housing the artillery command post, and a camouflaged ammunition depot supporting the entire defensive sector. Traditional tactics would have assigned these targets to different aircraft types: medium bombers for area targets, dive bombers for precision strikes, fighters for air cover. Johnson's mission collapsed all these roles into a single coordinated attack that exploited the P-47's unique combination of firepower, accuracy, and survivability. Each pilot had memorized approach routes, escape vectors, and backup targets. They would attack in sequence, with Johnson leading against the gun emplacement, while McCarthy and Walsh struck the command bunker and ammunition depot simultaneously. The Republic P-47D-25RE that Johnson flew bore little resemblance to the interceptor that had first entered combat in 1943. Engineers had transformed the basic airframe into a multi-role weapons platform, capable of carrying external loads that exceeded the empty weight of most fighter aircraft. Underwing pylons supported 500-pound bombs, fitted with instantaneous fuses for maximum blast effect against concrete structures. Rocket rails carried 8 5-inch HVAR projectiles, each with the armor-penetrating capability of a 105-meter artillery shell. The aircraft's 8 50-caliber Browning M2 machine guns represented the pinnacle of American aviation armament technology, capable of firing 4,800 rounds per minute, with sufficient accuracy to place bullets within a 6-foot circle at 1,000 yards. More importantly, the guns were harmonized to converge at 300 yards, perfect for the low-altitude strafing runs that had become the Thunderbolts' signature attack method. The combination of kinetic energy and explosive power available to a single P-47 exceeded that of a World War I artillery battery. The mission would demonstrate how American industrial innovation had created weapon systems that could accomplish strategic objectives through tactical applications, transforming the fundamental relationship between air power and ground warfare. Brigadier General Elwood Pete Quesada, commanding the NIA Tactical Air Command, had made the controversial decision to authorize single-flight missions against high-priority targets after witnessing the devastating losses suffered by larger formations over heavily defended German positions. Traditional air doctrine emphasized mass attacks that could overwhelm enemy defenses through sheer numbers. But German flak concentrations had made such approaches prohibitively expensive in both aircraft and experienced pilots. Quesada's tactical innovation represented a fundamental shift in American air power philosophy. Rather than accepting heavy losses to achieve marginal results, he was betting that small formations of highly skilled pilots could accomplish the same objectives with minimal risk. The Rhine mission would serve as proof of concept for close air support tactics that prioritize precision over mass, quality over quantity. If Johnson's flight succeeded, it would validate a new approach to tactical aviation that could be replicated across the European theater. Colonel Hans Scheller had positioned his defensive guns based on intelligence assessments that predicted large American bombing formations, approaching at altitudes between 12,000 and 18,000 feet. His 88mm guns were sighted for maximum effectiveness against massed bomber formations, with overlapping fields of fire designed to create killing zones through which no large aircraft could pass unscathed. Anti-aircraft crews had trained extensively in tracking and engaging formations of B-24 Liberators and B-17 Flying Fortresses. The German defensive plan contained a critical vulnerability that Scheller had not anticipated. His weapons were optimized for engaging predictable targets following established flight patterns at known altitudes. Single aircraft attacking at extremely low altitude would compress engagement windows to mere seconds, insufficient time for gun crews to track, acquire, and engage fast-moving targets. The psychological impact of facing determined pilots willing to accept enormous personal risk had not been factored into German defensive calculations. The success or failure of Johnson's mission would influence American air power doctrine for decades beyond World War II. Military observers from the Army Air Force's Tactical Center were already studying preliminary reports of P-47 ground attack missions, analyzing data that would inform post-war aircraft development and tactical procedures. The concept of using single-engine fighters as precision strike weapons represented a revolution in military aviation that challenged established theories about air power employment. German defensive doctrine along the Rhine depended on creating prohibitively expensive engagement conditions for Allied air attacks. If small formations could accomplish the same objectives as large bomber streams without accepting massive casualties, the entire German strategy of trading Allied aircraft for time would collapse. The Rhine Bridge represented more than a tactical crossing point. It symbolized the failure of German defensive philosophy against American technological and tactical innovation. The three P-47s approaching through the morning mist carried implications that extended far beyond their immediate military objectives, representing the evolution of warfare itself toward precision weapons and surgical strikes that would define military aviation for the remainder of the 20th century. 851 hours, 2,000 feet, above the Rhine Valley. Johnson's thumb hovered over the radio transmit button as the three Thunderbolts descended through broken cloud cover. Below them, the Rhine Valley spread out like a detailed military map, the damaged but functional Ludendorff Bridge spanning dark water, American vehicles streaming across in endless columns, and the German defensive positions that had held them under fire for 10 days. Muzzle flashes winked from concealed gun emplacements as German artillery continued their methodical bombardment of the crossing. Tiger flight? This is Tiger lead. Johnson's voice crackled through the radio static. Target bearing 090 degrees. Range 3 miles. Execute on my mark. The three aircraft spread into attack formation. Engines throttled back to reduce noise signatures that might alert German spotters. At 180 miles per hour, they had less than 60 seconds before weapon release. 60 seconds to accomplish what entire bomber wings had failed to achieve. The German 80mm gun emplacement materialized through Johnson's gun sight as the P-47 leveled at 500 feet. Concrete walls 3 feet thick surrounded the weapon pit, with steel-reinforced firing slits designed to withstand direct artillery hits. The gun crew was traversing their weapon toward American positions across the river, completely unaware of the death approaching from behind the morning haze. Johnson's aircraft carried two 500-pound bombs fitted with 11-second delay fuses, enough explosive power to crack open the bunker like an eggshell. Tiger lead attacking now. Johnson pulled the aircraft into a shallow dive, airspeed building toward 280 miles per hour as the target expanded in his bomb sight. The mathematical precision required for accurate bomb delivery at such low altitude left no margin for error. Release altitude, forward airspeed, wind correction, target angle. Variables that bomber crews calculated with sophisticated equipment were being computed through pilot instinct and combat experience. At 400 feet altitude, Johnson pickled his bombs and immediately pulled into a climbing turn to avoid the blast effects. Behind him, the two 500-pound weapons arced downward with deadly precision, their nose fuses armed and ready. The German gun crew had perhaps 3 seconds to comprehend what was happening before 1,000 pounds of Composition B explosive detonated simultaneously inside their reinforced position. The explosion shattered the morning quiet with a sound that could be heard 15 miles away. Concrete fragments weighing hundreds of pounds were hurled through the air like shrapnel. The carefully positioned 80mm gun, capable of destroying any Allied tank at 3 miles range, was reduced to twisted metal scattered across a crater 20 feet deep. 6 German artillery specialists who had survived 2 years of combat on the Eastern Front were killed instantly, their defensive position erased from existence in a single, perfectly delivered attack. Tiger II rolling in. Lieutenant McCarthy's voice remained steady, despite the massive explosion that had just erupted directly ahead of his flight path. His target, the German command bunker coordinating artillery fire across the entire defensive sector, required even greater precision. The structure was partially underground, with only its observation slits and radio antennas visible above ground level. 0852 hours. The command bunker. McCarthy's P-47 screamed over the smoking crater where the 88mm gun had been, his 850 caliber machine guns already chattering as he aligned on the German command post. Tracer rounds sparked off reinforced concrete as he walked his fire across the bunker's observation slits, forcing German spotters to take cover just as his bombs separated from their underwing pylons. The mathematical precision of the attack was breathtaking. McCarthy had calculated his release point to place both 500-pound bombs within a 6-foot circle of the bunker's most vulnerable point. Inside the command post, Major Friedrich Weber was shouting coordinates into his field telephone when McCarthy's machine gun fire shattered the periscope he had been using to direct artillery strikes. The distinctive sound of Browning .50 calibers, 8 guns firing 4,800 rounds per minute, filled the concrete chamber with ricocheting fragments and the smell of cordite. Weber threw himself away from the observation slit, just as the first bomb penetrated the bunker's roof through its ventilation system. The explosion occurred inside the command center itself, magnifying the blast effects through confined space compression. Communications equipment worth thousands of Reichsmarks was pulverized instantly. Maps, charts, and artillery firing tables that had taken weeks to prepare were incinerated. Most critically, the radio systems coordinating defensive fire across 5 miles of Rhine riverfront went silent simultaneously. Weber and 4 staff officers were killed by the initial blast, while the bunker's structural integrity collapsed completely under the second bomb's impact. Tiger 3, you're clear to attack. Flight Officer Walsh had witnessed both previous strikes with professional detachment, but his target presented the greatest challenge. The camouflaged ammunition depot contained enough artillery shells and small arms ammunition to supply the entire German defensive sector for weeks. Intelligence reports indicated the facility was protected by concrete blast walls and dispersed across multiple smaller bunkers to minimize damage from single hits. Walsh's approach required split-second timing to achieve maximum destructive effect. His P-47 carried 8 5-inch HVAR rockets, in addition to 2 500-pound bombs, enough firepower to engage multiple targets in a single pass. The rockets would be used to breach the blast walls protecting the ammunition storage areas, while the bombs would create the sustained fires necessary to detonate stored ordnance through secondary explosions. At 300 feet altitude, Walsh triggered his first 4 rockets in rapid succession. The 5-inch projectiles struck the concrete barriers with armor-piercing impacts that punched through reinforced walls like paper. Immediately behind the rockets, his bombs impacted directly on the exposed ammunition storage areas, their delay fuses allowing penetration before detonation. The initial explosions were spectacular enough, but they were merely the trigger for what followed. 0853 hours, secondary explosions. The German ammunition depot contained approximately 2,000 artillery shells, ranging from 75mm to 150mm caliber, plus countless thousands of small arms rounds, mortar shells, and specialized munitions. When Walsh's bombs detonated among the stored ordnance, they initiated a chain reaction that exceeded anything the American pilots had anticipated. The first secondary explosion launched a 150mm artillery shell nearly half a mile into the air, where it detonated like a massive firework against the morning sky. What followed was 5 minutes of continuous explosions, as stored ammunition cooked off in a pyrotechnic display visible from Allied positions 20 miles away. Individual artillery shells launched themselves in random directions, some landing in the Rhine River and creating waterspouts 50 feet high. German soldiers throughout the defensive sector abandoned their positions and ran for cover as their own ammunition rained down around them like a biblical plague. The psychological impact on German defenders was immediate and devastating. Within minutes of the attack, radio intercepts detected German units requesting permission to withdraw from positions that had become untenable. The carefully coordinated defensive fire that had threatened the Rhine Bridge for 10 days simply ceased as surviving gun crews lost communication with their command structure and found themselves under bombardment from their own exploding ammunition supplies. In less than 7 minutes, 3 American aircraft had accomplished what weeks of conventional bombing had failed to achieve: the complete collapse of organized German resistance along a 5-mile section of the Rhine defensive line. 900 hours. American Bridgehead, eastern bank of the Rhine. The silence that followed the massive ammunition depot explosions was more unnerving to American ground forces than the constant artillery fire they had endured for 10 days. Colonel Leonard Engemann, commanding the 14th Tank Battalion, watched through his field glasses as smoke columns rose from what had been impregnable German positions just minutes earlier. His Sherman tanks, which had been pinned down by accurate 88mm fire since crossing the bridge, were now moving freely across terrain that had been a killing field throughout the previous week. First Lieutenant Robert Mackenzie, leading a reconnaissance patrol toward the destroyed German positions, reported scenes of devastation that exceeded anything witnessed during the Normandy breakout. The 80mm gun emplacement had been completely obliterated, with concrete fragments scattered across a 100-yard radius. The massive gun barrel, capable of penetrating 4 inches of armor at 2,000 yards, lay twisted and broken like a discarded toy. German casualties were total. 6 artillery specialists killed instantly, their bodies found buried under tons of reinforced concrete. The command bunker presented an even more complete picture of destruction. Major Friedrich Weber's body was recovered from what remained of the communications center, still clutching a field telephone that had been fused into an unrecognizable mass of melted metal and plastic. Artillery firing tables that had represented months of careful survey work were reduced to ash. Most critically, the radio equipment coordinating defensive fire across the entire sector had been destroyed so completely that German engineers would require weeks to restore communications. American intelligence officers conducting battlefield assessment estimated that the 3-aircraft strike had eliminated German defensive capabilities equivalent to those of an entire artillery regiment. The 80mm gun alone had been responsible for destroying 11 American tanks and armored vehicles since March 7th. The command post had coordinated fire missions involving over 40 separate gun positions. The ammunition depot had contained enough ordnance to sustain German defensive operations for at least 3 additional weeks. By 1100 hours, American forces were advancing across terrain that had been impassable under concentrated German fire just hours earlier. The 78th Infantry Division reported seizing objectives that had been designated as long-term goals, requiring week-long preparation. Tank commanders who had been forced to operate from concealed positions were now conducting reconnaissance in force missions that penetrated German defensive lines without encountering organized resistance. German prisoners captured during the afternoon advance provided intelligence that confirmed the complete breakdown of defensive coordination along the Rhine front. Artillery units had lost communication with forward observers. Infantry companies were requesting permission to withdraw from positions they considered untenable. Most significantly, German commanders were reporting ammunition shortages that would prevent sustained defensive operations even if communication systems could be restored. The broader strategic implications became apparent within hours of the attack, as German defensive doctrine along the entire Rhine front began to unravel under the psychological impact of witnessing supposedly impregnable positions destroyed by minimal American forces. March 18, 1945. Wehrmacht Army Group B headquarters. Field Marshal Walter Model received the preliminary damage reports from the Remagen sector with disbelief that gradually transformed into strategic despair. 3 American aircraft had accomplished what his defensive planners had deemed impossible: the systematic destruction of key defensive positions that had required months to construct and fortify. The mathematics of the attack were as devastating as the physical destruction. 1,000 pounds of American ordnance had eliminated German defensive capabilities worth millions of Reichsmarks in equipment, fortifications, and irreplaceable veteran personnel. Model's staff officers presented casualty figures that reflected the surgical precision of the American attack. German losses totaled 31 killed and 67 wounded, but these numbers failed to convey the qualitative impact on defensive capabilities. The dead included Major Weber, whose expertise in coordinating artillery fire had made him irreplaceable, and Master Sergeant Klaus Hoffmann, whose gun crew had achieved the highest accuracy rates in the entire defensive sector. These were veteran specialists whose combat experience could not be replaced by the teenage conscripts and foreign volunteers, who now comprised the majority of Wehrmacht personnel. The ammunition depot's destruction created supply problems that extended far beyond the immediate battle area. The facility had served as the primary ordnance distribution center for German forces, defending a 25-mile section of the Rhine front. Artillery units throughout the sector reported ammunition reserves sufficient for less than 48 hours of sustained combat. Replacement supplies would require transportation from depots east of the Rhine, but American air superiority made such movements virtually impossible during daylight hours. Intelligence reports from German reconnaissance aircraft provided additional confirmation of American tactical innovation that threatened to render traditional defensive doctrine obsolete. The attack profile used by Johnson's flight, extremely low altitude, high speed, precision weapons delivery, could not be countered by existing German anti-aircraft systems. The 80mm guns that formed the backbone of German air defense were designed to engage high-altitude bomber formations, not single-engine fighters attacking from treetop level. Strategic consequences. By March the 20th, the tactical success at Remagen had influenced German defensive planning along the entire Western Front. OKW, Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, issued revised defensive instructions, acknowledging that concentrated defensive positions were vulnerable to precision air attacks that could eliminate key capabilities with minimal warning. The new doctrine emphasized dispersed positions and redundant command structures, but such changes required time and resources that Germany no longer possessed. American commanders recognized the broader implications of the mission's success with equal clarity. General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group reported that the Remagen bridgehead had been expanded to encompass objectives originally scheduled for capture in April. The collapse of organized German resistance along the Rhine had accelerated American advance schedules by an estimated 3 weeks, potentially shortening the war in Europe by months. The psychological impact on German morale proved as significant as the tactical results. Wehrmacht situation reports documented increasing incidents of units requesting permission to withdraw from positions deemed vulnerable to precision air attack. German soldiers who had witnessed the destruction of supposedly impregnable fortifications began questioning the viability of continued resistance against American forces that possessed such overwhelming technological advantages. Most significantly, the mission demonstrated that American air power had evolved beyond traditional roles of air superiority and strategic bombing to become a precision instrument capable of achieving strategic objectives through tactical applications. The 3 P-47 Thunderbolts had proven that in the hands of skilled pilots, minimal forces could accomplish what entire bomber wings had failed to achieve, revolutionizing military aviation doctrine for generations to come. The thunder that echoed across the Rhine Valley on March 17, 1945, represented more than the sound of exploding ordnance. It announced the birth of precision warfare that would define military aviation for the remainder of the 20th century. 3 American pilots flying obsolescent fighter aircraft had demonstrated that surgical strikes could accomplish strategic objectives, previously requiring massive formations and acceptable losses. The lessons learned over the Rhine would influence everything from the development of guided munitions to the tactical doctrines that shaped conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. Captain Robert Johnson, Lieutenant James McCarthy, and Flight Officer Thomas Walsh had unknowingly participated in a revolution that transformed warfare from an exercise in mass destruction to an art of precise application of force. Their mission proved that technology, when combined with exceptional training and tactical innovation, could achieve decisive results without the enormous human costs that had characterized previous conflicts. The German defensive positions destroyed in 7 minutes had required months to construct and years of experience to operate effectively. The broader implications extended beyond military affairs to influence how democratic societies would approach future conflicts. The ability to achieve strategic objectives through minimal force application offered alternatives to the total war concepts that had dominated the first half of the 20th century. Precision weapons and surgical strikes promised to reduce civilian casualties while maintaining military effectiveness, appealing to populations weary of global conflicts that had claimed millions of lives. Yet the most profound legacy of that March morning lay not in technological advancement, but in human courage and professional competence. 3 young Americans, flying alone through hostile airspace, had trusted their training, their aircraft, and each other to accomplish what seemed impossible. Their success demonstrated that in warfare, as in all human endeavors, individual excellence and determination could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The thunder they created over the Rhine had announced not just tactical victory, but the enduring power of skilled individuals to shape the course of history through acts of extraordinary courage and precision.